It is my pleasure to introduce our luncheon speaker, Hugh Price. Hugh is the former president of the Urban League and the Weinberg Sachs visiting professor here at the Woodrow Wilson School. Hugh has a distinguished 40-year career that includes journalism, philanthropy, the law, and social advocacy. He has worked in both public television and journalism, serving for 6 years as the senior vice president of WNET, Channel 13 in New York, and he spent 4 years on the editorial board of the New York Times. He worked in philanthropy as the vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and he served for 9 years as the head of the National Urban League, where he is widely credited for restoring the nonprofit organization's fiscal health and reviving its strategic vision. Hugh has received many honorary degrees, including from Yale University, Amherst College, Indiana University, as well as the Medal of Honor from the Yale Law School and the President's Medal from Hunter College, and honorary degrees from numerous other colleges and universities. He is the author of Achievement Matters, Getting Your Child the Best Education Possible, Destination, the American Dream, and Mobilizing the Community to Help Students Achieve. Hugh is well known for his creative approach to policy issues, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing his thoughts on his topic, Thinking and Looking Outside the Box in Urban School Reform. Please welcome Hugh Price.
Thank you very much, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here today and to have a chance to share some thoughts about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I want to salute Rich and all of his colleagues at the Research Policy Institute for all of the timely forums that they stage and all the other great work that they do. And I also want to salute the New Jersey School Boards Association for all of their work. Educators are my heroes, and I don't say that lightly. My wife and I have raised 3 children, and we have seen the wondrous things that educators do to help children develop and prosper. This is a subject I've been involved in for most of my professional career. When I was the head of the National Urban League, we launched a campaign for African American achievement. The so-called National Commission on Teaching in America's Future was born at my desk at the Rockefeller Foundation when I was there. I will talk a little bit about another favorite program or initiative of mine called the National Guard Youth Challenge Corps, which is a quasi-military corps for young people who have dropped out of school. I've long believed in the work of Dr. James Comer and the School Development Project, and in fact, my wife and I bought our first house on 4th Street in New Haven, Connecticut in 1968. I think it was 1968. I tell people I still have a photographic memory. I just don't get same-day service anymore. But our house was across the street from the very first school where Dr. Comer began his work, and we enrolled our daughter in that school as a kindergartner. So I believe that, as Rich mentioned, I've had a chance to write a couple of books, Achievement Matters, which is basically for parents, and the other book, Mobilizing Communities, is sort of the bookend for that one, focusing on what communities can do. I feel the need to, in the spirit of being a lapsed lawyer, to say a little something about caveat emptor. I am not an educator, but I am a parent and consumer of education. I have served as a mentor to young people. I've been an advocate. I've been blessed to be able to write a book or 2. I've served as an editorial writer and author of articles on this subject, and as I tell audiences where there are young people, probably the greatest source of expertise I have is that I'm a retired kid. And I remember to this day what that was like. We all know how important education is to our society. We are learning that the academic skills required in the workplace are converging with the skills required in the labor force. We know, although we don't often say it, that, and we don't respect it, but the children, America's children, are the human infrastructure of the knowledge economy that will enable us to compete globally. We know but don't pay enough attention to the fact that minority youngsters have surged to 42% of the public school enrollment nationally. That is up from 22% merely 3 decades ago. Yet by and large, these young people, these economically indispensable young people, are generally those who are lagging farthest behind academically. We've just seen the studies about the participation rates in advanced placement released just the other day. American youngsters have made some gratifying headway in recent years, but even so, as we look at the results of the National Assessment of Educational Progress in 2007, there's still a road yet to travel. When you look at young people who are scoring so-called below basic, which is a notch or two below grade level, some 50% of Latino youngsters in the 4th grade scored below basic, according to NAEP, and 54% of African American youngsters scored below basic in the 4th grade in 2007. And roughly 54% of youngsters who are eligible for free and reduced lunch also scored below basic. Lest we think that this is just a minority issue, as recently as I believe 2005, roughly 37% of all youngsters who are in the lowest quintile, according to NAEP, were white. We also know that the rates of dropping out are alarmingly high. Roughly 50% of African American and Latino youngsters fail to graduate from high school. We know lots of young people are repeating grades, although we don't talk about that a lot. And there's another phenomenon in the schools which is critically important, and we don't have much data on it, but it's a phenomenon of young people who have just disengaged from school. They're technically enrolled, but they're not into school, if you know what I mean. Now, the Educational Testing Service here in Princeton has done some very important research in looking at the correlations between achievement and various phenomena, and they produced a study which is very important called Parsing the Achievement Gap, which looks at the fact that various factors that are under the control of schools matter enormously in achievement, things like rigor of the curriculum, teacher preparation, class size, etc., that the learning environment in school also matters. But they also noted that a number of factors that are outside of the purview of schools also matter. Developmental issues like birth weight and exposure to lead, parent participation, reading to young children, the amount of time that children spend watching television at home, and student mobility, factors that are technically not under the control of the school, nonetheless impact the ability of children to perform in school. They also reported in that study that there are significant gaps in the extent to which these phenomena impact achievement along racial lines and also along income lines. Now, what I want to do today is talk about a few issues and approaches that I think are worth considering, otherwise I wouldn't talk about them. I'm not going to speak to some that we all know about and that we know are critically important. I think we know, as Gordon McGinnis indicated, that early childhood education programs that are rich in literacy and developmental services are important. Teacher quality is enormously important. The role of parents is enormously important. But I want to talk today about something which seems more ephemeral, but it isn't, and that's the idea of whole schools for whole children. I want to talk about some places where we can look for approaches to that might surprise us. And lastly, I want to talk about the subject of the book, which is community mobilization. I'm not going to talk about the book just because the publisher says you're supposed to talk about the book. I'm going to talk about the book because I think it's useful to think about it. A couple years ago, I was fortunate to co-chair a commission on the whole child, which was established by the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. And the commission was formed by Gene Carter, the CEO, because he was convinced, and all of us who served on the commission were convinced, that we really can't begin to close the most stubborn of the achievement gaps unless we take a more holistic look at what's happening in the lives of children and at how schools and communities, parents and teachers need to collaborate in addressing an array of issues that impact the readiness and capacity of young people to achieve. Many young people, as you all know, already achieve at very high levels, and in many respects that's because the developmental supports that are required in their lives are basically second nature to their homes, their families, and their communities. But as I noted, according to the study done by ETS, there are many factors that correlate with achievement gaps, and roughly half of those factors, or more than those factors, have to do with what's going on outside of the school. I mentioned that I have followed Dr. James Comer's work for years, and I consider myself a Comer disciple, but he has always preached about the importance and the linkage between education and development. And that is because there are so many things going on in the lives of children outside of school and so many voids in their lives outside of school that impact on their capacity and readiness to achieve. Dr. Comer, who served on our commission, was fond of recalling how when he was growing up there was a conspiracy among the adults in his life in order to try to ensure that he was successful. And as we examine these issues and the imperative to address development, we decided that the whole point of the commission was in effect to try to rekindle that conspiracy, that partnership between school and community and parents in order to fill in those developmental voids. Our commission came to the conclusion that to develop a whole child, we must promote the physical, social, and emotional health of children. We must provide safe and secure environments for learning. We must foster engagement and a sense of connection. We must engage and train and connect the young people with caring adults, and we must ensure broad-based education for every child. Now, in the era of No Child Left Behind, I recognize that we all care whether or not youngsters can read, and we want to know whether they can read, and the fact that they can or cannot must be transparent. But in our zeal, we don't want to stifle the education and development of whole children so that they can become just the way we want our children to be. So we need to invest but not disinvest in curricula and in programs that nurture the whole child. And we need to learn from the institutions that do a good job of developing and educating whole children. Now, interestingly enough, and this is where we're going to start looking outside the box, the institution that causes, for many, many people, the greatest amount of indigestion, namely the military, probably knows as much about this and arguably more about the development of the whole adolescent than educators do and than school systems do. And I have been interested in what they know for many, many years. Some 35 years ago, a small foundation gave a consulting firm where I was working a grant to look at the phenomenon of the disconnection of young African American males from the schools. And I remember as I was thinking about, well, I know what the disconnection is, what are we going to do about it? I thought back to my own experience growing up in Washington, D.C., and how a number of the young men who were my classmates in school, fellows who had rough edges, fellows who in those quaint days we used to call knuckleheads and thugs, would drop out of school, and I would run into many of them several years later. They were in their Army uniforms, they were ramrod straight, they were full of purpose. Something had happened. I never served in the military, but I remember thinking something powerful had happened to them. And I don't think that they had been programmed by the Chinese. What was that movie? Remember I told you I don't get same-day service anymore. So I remembered that as we went about this work. And I remember coming up with a notion back in 1975 or 76 that wouldn't it be wonderful if we could figure out how to create quasi-military youth corps for kids that would capture what it is that the military knows about turning people around. At that time, we were coming out of the Vietnam War. It really was not a good time politically to be proposing anything military, so our idea was stillborn. When I got to the Rockefeller Foundation in 1988, I said one of the blessings of being able to work at a foundation is that you can take ideas out of the deep freeze, sprinkle some fresh seasonings on them, and then try to sell them again. I got access to the head of the National Guard in the Pentagon, named General Herb Temple, and I went to see him, and he was there with a fellow I'd never met by the name of Dan Donahue, who was head of public information. I had the equivalent of a 1989, this is in the spring of '89, a 1989 PowerPoint presentation written out on old raggedy yellow papers. I started into the presentation expecting it was going to take me half an hour to get through the pitch. 10 minutes into the meeting, and the point of the pitch was, wouldn't it be wonderful if you guys would create a quasi-military youth corps for kids who dropped out of school? 10 minutes into the meeting, they said, we get it, we'll do it. And I kept on talking, and then I remembered, when you've made the sale, shut up, close the briefcase, and go home. That conversation in the spring of 1989 became the National Guard Youth Challenge Corps, which I'll talk about in a minute. The Challenge Corps, excuse me, I'll talk about it now. The Challenge Corps got started in 1993. It has been around ever since. It operates in roughly half the states. Some 81,000 young people have participated. Young people spend 22 weeks on a military base where they're engaged in all manner of activities. And it's been a fascinating journey for that program. Some people may ask, well, why the military beyond this hazy recollection of what happened to your classmates? Well, the military has a reputation, well-deserved, for its ability to reach, teach, and develop young people who are rudderless. The time-effective training and development of young people is a matter of life or death for the military. They have got to get that right. They have a proven competence in training, team building, and managing for diversity. When I was blessed in the course of doing a paper on this subject more recently for the Brookings Institution, we met with General Colin Powell, and he said the most exquisite example of our capacity to train young people to perform is to go onto an aircraft carrier and watch all those youngsters who are high school graduates from all over the country, from every walk of life, every race, everything you can imagine, function in exquisite synchronization, doing their jobs as though everything depends on it, because that airplane coming into the aircraft carrier depends on it. And if any youngster fails to perform and to do what the rest of the team is relying on him to do, that plane and that pilot go into the ocean. So he said, if you ever want to understand the way we go about it, look at what happens there. I was told, although I've never confirmed it, but I was told that the military spends more money on understanding human development than any other institution on earth. You think about it, they've got the biggest stake in figuring it out. And of course, they have perhaps the most exemplary track record in modern history in the advancement and development of minorities. When I was at Brookings, about a couple years ago, and I went back to these issues of what the military may have to offer, we looked at several initiatives, including basic training. We came upon a wonderful program in Mississippi that operated in the early 80s called the Pre-Military Development Program, where folks who had tried to get in but who could not pass the test went to a special intensive program on a campus of a community college in Mississippi. We looked at the Youth Challenge program, and we looked at quasi-military high schools. There are a number of public military high schools in this country that emulate many of the attributes of JRTC, including a couple of them just down the road in Philadelphia. And we were looking not for how do you create a lot of military things, but are there generic attributes in the way they go about their business that might be germane to how public schools could function? And there were a number of fascinating and compelling attributes: belonging, teamwork, motivation and self-discipline, structure and routine, accountability and consequences, safety and security, valuing and believing that every youngster can succeed. Different starting points psychologically for the military vis-a-vis its recruits. Close mentoring and monitoring, rewards and recognition. You know, all that stuff that seems kind of cornpone if you're not in it matters. All that recognition and those promotions matter. Demanding schedules and so forth. The other thing you learn is that they, as I mentioned, they are committed to the development of the whole adolescent. And they, as a great minister of Riverside Church once said, I love this phrase, they know how to tangibilitate the idea of developing. Don't you like that word, tangibilitate? They know how to tangibilitate the proposition that all children can learn and all children can be developed. So when you look at the 8 core components of the National Guard Youth Challenge program, one component is leadership and followership. not only do they teach kids, they foster their leadership skills, but they also say with them, look, in the real world, you're not going to be in charge all the time. And you're going to have supervisors and bosses and customers and spouses and grandmothers, and you're going to have to learn how to navigate a world where you're not calling the shots. And don't get your ego all wrapped up in the fact that you're not calling the shots. Just learn how to perform. So leadership and followership. Responsible citizenship is a major component of the Challenge program. Service to the community is a major component. Teaching the youngsters life coping skills, how to search for, well, job and life coping skills and job skills. How to search for a job, how to present yourself in an interview, how to comport yourself, how to dress. Physical fitness, huge issue. I just finished teaching a seminar on childhood obesity. It's a huge issue for young people. Health and hygiene, and of course, academic excellence. These are the components of the development of the whole youngster in the Challenge program, and one of the places that would be the least likely place to look for that model. And they have figured out how to do it. They have figured out what the day looks like. Now, admittedly, they've got the kids 24/7, but they have figured out what these components are and have meshed them together. There are variations on these themes, and I mentioned the public military academies. I visited the school, Public Military Academy in Leeds in Philadelphia, and contrary to the impression that this is a rigid, regimented, sterile, somber environment, it's a school that kids attend. So yes, they're there in their uniforms, but there are, in addition to the regular faculty, there are JROTC people there who are there to advise the youngsters, who actually offer the courses on leadership and followership and health and hygiene. The environment in this school is safe and orderly, but not oppressive. It's a very kid-friendly place. The door of the principal's office was open the entire day, and kids are streaming in and out. There's very strong and a structured peer pressure system there, so that the young people know that their peers are relying upon them. The teachers are relaxed and into teaching. They actually get to teach because they don't have to deal with a lot of the other stuff that goes on in schools. The children were attentive and on task. We visited a biology course when I was there, and the youngsters were doing a unit on photosynthesis, which they understood, and the teacher very proudly told us, you know, we do 2 units on it. One is where I give them the instructions about what they're supposed to do so they can actually see photosynthesis work, and then I go let them create their own experiment in photosynthesis. I keep an eye on what kind of ingredients. I don't want the room to blow up. But, you know, the children are engaged in the process of discovery. It's very exciting to visit a school environment like that. Now you're probably asking, well, how do these kinds of programs do? You need to know that they're young. Many of these schools are young. There is self-selection, et cetera, et cetera. But what we know about them so far is very encouraging. And one thing I would encourage you to be on the lookout for if you are intrigued by these ideas is that the MDRC, which is one of the premier evaluation outfits in this field, they do all the random assignment evaluation. My wife works for them, and she tries to explain it to me. I don't understand it, but they do some of the sort of Cadillac versions of evaluations. They have been engaged in an evaluation of the National Guard Youth Challenge Corps. I've seen the draft of the report. I'm not going to say anything about the content of the report, but I'd urge you to read it. It's very interesting. It's not only interesting, it's illuminating, because not only do they report on the first wave of findings, but they also give you a sense of how it works. What's the nature of the experience? What do these core components look like? What are the attitudes of the military folks and teachers who are in these programs? It's fascinating stuff. In that program called the Pre-Military Development Program that I mentioned, 88% of the participants gained 2 to 3 grade levels in reading and math in an average of 6 weeks. That ain't bad. That's not bad. The high school in Philadelphia, the public military high school, they outperformed the district average in reading and math on the Terra Nova test. They outperformed the district averages in reading and matched the state test in math. The attendance rate is 93% there compared to 89% district-wide, and the teacher attendance rate is 96% in contrast to 74% district-wide. It tells you something about the environment there for the teachers. The Army, which up until the economic meltdown and everybody looking for jobs wherever they can find them, had a serious recruitment problem, as I'm sure we all know. Last fall, they instituted a program called the Army Preparatory School at Fort Jackson in South Carolina for young people who want to join the Army but who had taken the test and couldn't pass. These young people who want a second shot can enlist. They are sent to Fort Jackson for an intensive academic preparation experience, and if they then pass the test and get their GED, they are obliged to go into the Army, but that's sort of like ROTC, where if you sign up, you get the benefits, you've got to go. 99% of the first contingent of 400 students earned their GED at Fort Jackson. A delegation of people from the National Association of State School Boards of Education visited Fort Jackson in the spring, and Brenda Wellborn, who is their executive director, said, if we can learn from their lessons for accelerated remediation, that's going to be a way we're going to have to go. On December 8th or thereabouts, December 10th, there was an article in Education Week about this initiative called Armed with a GED. It's illuminating. Down the road in West Philadelphia, a fellow who had been the deputy principal at the Public Military Academy is now the deputy principal at one of the traditional high schools, a high school that had a lot of issues. They've introduced some of the structure and approach into that school. Violent acts have declined by 52%. The attendance has increased by 10% to 85%. They are setting the stage for other forms of progress. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. I do not advocate militarizing our public schools. That's not why I'm interested in this subject. But I do think we can look to this body of work and these approaches for ways that may be able to help us accelerate learning and reading capacity by youngsters who are having a hard time now and for whom summer school doesn't work. Imagine taking some of these approaches to accelerated learning that we see in these programs and offering a different kind of summer school. It's possible to imagine new middle schools and high schools that emulate the generic attributes of these kinds of programs but that aren't military per se. We can implement, as they are in West Philadelphia, key military-like models and methods in troubled schools. We might even, in a different fiscal environment, I'm not under any illusions about what we're dealing with, create quasi-military boarding schools for young people who are having a really hard time. In other words, this is a place to look for new ways of thinking about teaching, instruction, and development. Lastly, let me just offer some comments about the whole area of community mobilization. I believe very strongly that educators should not and cannot be asked to do the job of educating alone, that they need help and that they should reach out for help to communities, and that communities have an obligation to pull on the oars as well. And that's the whole point of the book, about mobilizing the community to help students succeed. In the course of writing the book, we came upon some fascinating research about why motivation matters. And the research is very clear that there are connections between how motivated a child is, how conscientious a child is, and whether they come to school in a frame of mind to learn. The research is clear that valuing young people matters enormously. Claude Steele of Stanford has done some terrific work on this, because there are young people who walk around saying, why don't the teachers like me? Why do the teachers think I'm stupid? The military doesn't think that their youngsters are stupid. They believe that the children can achieve, and the children need to feel the same way. We came upon evidence that belonging matters enormously, and it's critically important for young people to be able to belong to positive youth groups as opposed to negative. And that recognition and rituals are critically important, whether it's 4-H, the Boy Scouts, or county fairs. And lastly, that communities are a vital untapped resource because communities set the values and they can provide the recognition that is necessary. Now, before I knew anything about the research and when I was heading the National Urban League, we launched a campaign for African American achievement, which was essentially an effort to mobilize folks in the black community to spread the gospel of achievement. And we came up with a number of ideas which were implemented in various communities, and there were others as well. And the whole point of the book is to share some of these notions. We designated the third Saturday of September at the beginning of the school year as Achievement Day, and we had things like achievement-oriented rallies on the campus of the University of Southern California where some 1,200 young people came out. We had days where we celebrated youngsters who are doing the right thing, saying that not only is academic achievement important, but so is community service. There were fascinating initiatives to get youngsters into reading and to promote literacy. Out in Gary, Indiana, the Urban League, working with the various school districts, had a mass readathon in the minor league baseball stadium, and they rounded up 6,000 children who came to the baseball stadium, and they read a book in unison. And the activity made the Guinness Book of World Records. In Mount Vernon, New York, right next to where we live, the superintendent challenged the children in elementary school to read 50 books. And they promised every child who read 50 books that she or he would get a free bicycle. Some academicians scoffed at this and said, why should we be giving kids bribes of bicycles to get them to read? So the superintendent said they'll be reading long after they stop riding bicycles. So it's okay. Nearly 170 children in this small district, whose demographics are very much like any urban area, read 50 books. Another 570 of the children read 40 to 49 books, and a total of over 1,600 youngsters read 25 or more books that year. We also decided as part of the achievement campaign that we needed to create a very different kind of peer group for youngsters. So we took an idea that had gotten started in Florida called the McKnight Achiever Society, made it national, branded it as the National Achiever Society. And it was, in essence, a community-based honor society for black kids who had earned at least a B average in school. We know there's the honor society for the kids who get A averages. Not a lot of our kids were participating, but we thought still that they were doing something vitally important. And as part of the effort to mobilize the community, the induction ceremonies for the youngsters who had earned B averages or better were held in African American churches. As a result of that, the ceremony lasted a little longer than 45 minutes. I remember being in Bayview Baptist Church in San Diego, where arrayed before me were 350 black children, all of whom had earned B averages, half of whom were boys. Out beyond them were 1,800 parents and grandparents and teachers there to wish the children on. The newspaper in town, the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint, published the pictures of all 350 children. Not one of those youngsters was ambivalent that day about being designated as an achiever. There was no doubt about that. Down in Columbia, South Carolina, the Urban League teamed up with State Farm to hold an SAT awareness rally. When I heard about that, I said, you folks have taken leave of your senses. Who's going to come learn about the SAT? 700 children came to learn about what's up with the SAT. Why is the SAT important in my life? How can I figure out how to get over? How can I learn how to do well? The featured speaker was not a celebrity. The featured speaker was Eleanor Horn, who's the vice president of the Educational Testing Service. But the children came. It was such a compelling story that the 3 television networks sent their reporters to the scene at Benedict College, because they'd never heard of 700 black kids coming together to learn about the SAT. And this was the lead story on the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news with live feeds from the chapel. I remember when I was growing up, we had science fairs back in Washington, D.C., and everybody had to do a science project, and just about everybody poured a Coca-Cola into a glass and put a tooth in there to find out how long it would take to dissolve. And it did dissolve, so it made for a good project. It's like watching turtles race, you know, just how long is it going to take? Well, wouldn't it be interesting to have achievement fairs all over town where kids did science projects or read poetry or did anything that is academically germane, and then have the parents and communities turn out. Lastly, I love parades. And I live right outside New York City. We have a lot of parades because we've got a lot of teams that win championships, and you all have claimed the Giants, and so they win. But we have parades for every reason on earth except to celebrate the children who are doing well in school. Can you imagine that? The kids would say, isn't that whacked? I think it would be fascinating to have parades down the main thoroughfares in town for every child who passes the state exam in reading. I once said that to Mayor Bloomberg. Why don't you have a parade down Fifth Avenue and on into the Canyon of Heroes for all the children who pass the New York State exam in reading? Let us make the achievers our heroes for a change. These are the kinds of ideas in the book. Some people have said, well, these are just one-offs, but I think the challenge is more important than staging a serious one-off. So I think it'd be fascinating in a given community for educators and school boards and teachers and community organizations to get together and say, okay, let's do this kind of thing in September, let's do this in October, let's do this in November, let's do this in January, this in May, and this school year will culminate with an Achievement Day parade down the main thoroughfare in town. That will create a drum roll for achievement, with the community banging on the drums and setting the value in a way that reinforces what goes on in school. There are plenty of community organizations that have this mindset. Of course, the PTAs and others, various kinds of community organizations like the Urban League, the NAACP, and others, faith-based organizations. There are many civic-minded organizations in our country. This could get jump-started if, for example, at a local level, the superintendent reached out, or the school board reached out, or the mayor reached out. It could get jump-started at a state level if the governor or the state education commissioner wanted to reach out and say, look, this is what we're going to try to do, but I need your help. And I even think that the community organizer-in-chief could do something with a White House summit that would be fascinating on this subject. Just to close, we all are familiar with the metaphor of the village, the proposition that it takes a village to raise a child. I think in the 21st century that we've got to reactivate the village. We've got to recognize that it's different, but we need all hands on deck. The kinds of things that I'm talking about do not entail rocket science. And in fact, the more you give an opportunity to community organizations, for example, to create stuff, it's a wondrous thing to watch them actually create. But we know that inertia is not an option. We know that we are making headway on a number of fronts with a number of children who've got the kinds of developmental supports they need that are already in place and who are hooked up with terrific teachers and terrific schools. But we also know that for a significant number of young people who are absolutely indispensable to this country, who are part of the infrastructure of the knowledge economy, we must find new ways, new methods, and new will in order to ensure that they too succeed. Thank you very, very much.
We have a few minutes for questions, and as the priest of church always reminds us, stay to the end if you can. Oh, I'm sorry. Stay to the end if you can, because we have some a good panel following you. But some questions for Mr. Price?
I made believers out of everybody. Yes.
Here we go.
You mentioned physical fitness is very important. You mentioned your involvement in fighting childhood obesity. This is a huge problem in society with the development of the automobile and so forth. And one aspect of the military, as you pointed out, is the emphasis and the requirement for physical fitness. and the discipline that goes along with that. Now, I'd like to ask you if you think that that has a strong tie-in with motivation and orientation towards academic interest and achievement. And of course, there are big differences between people. Some people would say, well, physical fitness has to come before mental fitness. If you're not physically fit, the blood flow doesn't flow to the brain adequately, and the brain goes to sleep or half asleep. That may seem like an exaggeration, but I've experienced it myself. So I'd like to ask you whether you think there shouldn't be more really serious emphasis on physical fitness as a part of academic development.
Yeah, I think we should. I think we should be creative about it, and also we should recognize that we're dealing with kids. So I don't see. It's fine if people want to do, push-ups and pull-ups and all that kind of thing, but that's kind of drudgery. So I think we need to find interesting ways to get kids to burn off energy. It's interesting, in conjunction with the course, we learned that Americans on average are consuming about 500 more calories per day than we did some years ago, and there's at least 500 calories in a soda and a snack in that vending machine that wasn't in the school system about 3 decades ago. So that's one place to start, is get those kind of sugared things out of the schools. Secondly, I think we can find inventive ways. We saw a wonderful example of a community-based program to get kids to burn off more energy, where they walk to school and they wrap themselves in a banner that's yellow, made like it's a walking school bus. Isn't that kind of fun? And they're just inside this big banner, about 20 of them walking to school like a walking bus. So I think we need to find enjoyable ways for young people to burn off energy, and let them sometimes figure out how they're going to do it, but we have to allocate the time and recognize the importance of it.
Aside from the military, have you looked at other institutions? Are there other things out there outside the box that you think are significant that might be examined?
Well, there are plenty of quite wonderful things going on. I mean, you know the brand names, the KIPP Academies and all those. I think there are a number of extraordinary people doing great work in schools. There are also all sorts of programs that don't have much cachet and aren't well known, or teachers are just doing the right thing. So I think there's plenty to look at there. The reason I'm so interested in the military is because of the sophistication in the system. When we talked with General Powell, and he was describing what basic training is all about, you could see the research just below the surface of everything he said. So there's a lot of thought that goes into what they do, why they do it, how they do it. There's also a lot of inventiveness. There was a remarkable article in either Atlantic or Harper's, I think in the summer of '07, about how basic training is being reconfigured, because the kids today are different. They recognize that the children aren't as obsequious as they used to be, so you can't just recruit them and say, do this, do that, because they can say, why? So the drill instructor is more of a coach today. So that's one big place to look, one big system to look at. I think that there's a lot. I think the history of how, for example, in the African American community, HBCUs have functioned in the development of young people is a place to look. Places like Montessori. So I just think we've got to extend the boundaries, and you won't find a lot of research on community, but for those of us who've been exposed to it and see how children react to it, you sort of intuitively know from what you see that there's something here, just as when I saw those knuckleheads and thugs, 2 years later, I said, something happened. There's something big. So I think we need to just be aware of where are there big changes, and what explains those big changes, and what can we extrapolate from what we see to think about how the systems function. And also, what are the kinds of supports that educators on the ground need in order to do what they, what their training and instinct tells them is best. I think we squeeze a lot of innovation and energy out of educators who would do things differently if they were given the space.
Okay. Okay. One more question up the top there.
In light of the coolness of our smart, high-achieving new president, I wonder if you feel there's a specific role for the federal government to play with regard to this.
Well, A lot of that depends on how this Recovery Act debate comes out. If a number of the education items in that stimulus package survive, then there'll be a lot more resources, a lot more energy, and a lot more leverage. If they don't survive, then it's going to be a different ballgame. And I'm quite aware also that schools, that states, and therefore school districts are going to be under a lot of fiscal pressure, and already are. And I worry about, backsliding. But I think the federal department can encourage innovation by, and one of the proposals is to provide grants to state education agencies to then flow down to communities that are eager to try new things that are evidence-based or that have promise. I think there's an expansion of quality preschool that's contemplated. But I also would love it, I have these dreams that are really kind of weird, but I would love it if he would have a White House summit where he invited people who would never normally go to the White House. The head of the beauticians and barbers, the Eastern Star. I mean, I would love to see barbers talking to the men when they have the straight razor right here at the jugular vein. Have you taught your child to read? I think there are ways in which we can engage people and can summon them to act that only he understands as a community organizer, and I think the country is ready to step up and share the responsibility, but we've got to make a very big deal out of this. I mean, one of the other kind of wacky ideas I said, we've got the Kennedy Center Awards for all of these terrific artists. Wouldn't it be something if we had a Kennedy Center Awards event for community organizations that do a wonderful job of promoting achievement in their communities? I mean, let's just turn this whole thing on its head and play to the best instincts and help the school systems get help to do the job that they need to do. Thank you.